Hello, today we're going to talk about leveling and surveying. So here is just something that I wanted us to tackle. So leveling and surveying by the method of rise and fall. So this is the most common method used during leveling works, either for civil or for building engineering. So these lectures by Gadgra Steven, certified TVET SEDAC trainer. So let's go to the question. And our question, so this is the NEC March 2023 series. Good question. So this question 3, and it follows. So the following, so question 3b, the following consecutive readings were taken with a leveling instrument at intervals of 20 meters. So this a leveling instrument, either dump level on auto level. So we had readings. So readings were as follows. So this is 2.375, 1.730, 0.615, 3.450, 2.835, 2.07, 1.835, 0.985, 0.435, 1.63, 2.255, and the last 3.63. So if the instrument was shifted after the fourth, and the eighth reading, and the last reading was taken on a benchmark of reduced level 110.2 meters, find the reduced level for all the points by the rise and fall method. Then we apply the arithmetic check in order for us to see what we have done, if that is the correct thing. So a total of 16 marks. This is a good question in which we can illustrate and we can look at it. So let's go and start. So we are going to observe the instrument position. We were told we had a shifting of the fourth and the eighth, so that's where our change points are. By the look of this data, so here was the first, so you can count physically. So 1, 2, 3, 4. After the fourth, there we had a shift. Then 5, 6, 7, 8. So there we had a change of instrument. I've illustrated that in diagram form. So the first reading, that is the back side. So that is the first reading taken with an instrument when taking leveling works. So that is the back side. That is 2.375. And then we have intermediate. So we had 2 intermediates. Then we have our last reading as the fourth side. So there is our fourth side, so you can remember. So these are the intermediates, and then here we have our fourth side. So that is the last reading taken with an instrument. So our ground was a little bit hilly, slopey, something like that. Then after the fourth reading, we had the shift of the instrument. So here was the first and here was the second. So there we had a shifting. So this is the second point where our instrument shifts to. And then we have again our back side for the second position of the instrument. That is the reading there. So this is the first reading of the second position of the instrument. We have 2 intermediates, so that is the intermediate side reading. So we have 2 of them there. Then after the 8th reading, we had a shift of the instrument. So again, there we have our foresight as the last reading of the second position of the instrument. So the instrument, so that's the second position. Then after the shift, now we have the third position of the instrument. After having that, so again here we have the first, so that is the first reading of the third shifting of the instrument. So that's the first reading there. Then we have our intermediates, then we have our last reading. So remember, in leveling, you are supposed to have your last reading. So some people forget that concept and put the intermediate as the last positioning of the instrument. So this is a simple illustration, as you can see. So the instrument shifted twice. So this was position 1, position 2, and the last position 3. So we had two shiftings of the instrument. So this is the first position the instrument was placed. We were told so we are supposed to use the rise and fall method in order for us to calculate the levels that were taken at the interval of 20 meters. So if that was the case, so in rise and fall, the position of the staff give us the direction where the instrument was held. So the instrument was held temporary here. So the staff was shifting. It's either the staff was in a resting position or it fell. So that's where our English diversion or our English meaning comes from. We can see in our first position the backside. So this is the first reading. We had 2.375. So this is the first reading. The instrument did not shift, so it's only the staff that moved, and the staff moved ahead. So you have illustrated. So the staff went on a hilly place, and if the staff went on a hilly place, a lower value will be observed because the instrument did not shift. That's why our staff reading, the value becomes 1.7 3 meters. You can remember the staff. At the bottom of the staff we had the 0 to the last metric. So we have the 4 meter staff, and we have an introduction of the 5 meter staff, that is the new staff. But in our most cases we use the 4 meter staff. So if our position, so if our staff, the bottom of the staff is 0, that means if the staff moves at a higher place, so this is 0 maintains from downwards, but the staff position moves upwards. That's where we observe a lower value than that of the previous. Again, the next reading, the staff moved a little bit higher again. That's where our value reduced, because the staff was at a position that was higher than that of the first reading. So that's where the rise and fall method comes in. So the staff either moved up or down, but by maintaining the position of the instrument until the place where we have a change point. There again, it's where the position of the damping level of the instrument will determine the reading of the next staff. And again, remember, at the change point here, while changing, we maintain the staff on the same position for the last reading of the instrument at position 1, and for the second instrument position. So we maintain in order for us to have a flow of our levels. So that's where our backside reading is taken. So our foresight, that's the last reading, and the back side, that is the first reading of the second position of the instrument, is taken. So make sure you remember we maintain that position. So the stuff there, we have two readings. So that is the last reading and the first reading of the second position of the instrument. So this is done until you reach the last reading of the leveling that was taken there. So you remember that. So the instrument on our first reading maintained the same position. On our second reading, it maintained the same position. Our staff either moved up or down according to the Healy or the value of the place. So that's where we have the rise and fall method coming in place. Having finished that, we move on to our table. So in our table here, we'll have at least 6 or 7 columns depending. So you can start here with the one for chainage, but here in our question, we never asked anything for calculation under the gradient, so I omitted that first column under the chainages. And after omitting that, so my first column here, we have the back side, intermediate side, and the foresight. So this is the first reading, the intermediate readings, and the last readings here. And then we are supposed to use rise and fall method. So there we have the rise and fall columns, then we have the reduced level column, then on our last we have the remarks column. We start here. So the first reading of the instrument, so this is the back side. Here we have 2.375. we have the intermediates, we have two intermediates, then we have our last reading there as 3.45. those are the value we are going to input. So here we have the first reading, our two intermediates, and we have the last reading of the first positioning of our instrument. Again we move to the second positioning of the instrument here. So here we have again our first reading, we have two intermediates, and we have our last reading there. So this is the last reading and this is the first reading, having two intermediates. And remembering, as I said earlier, the last reading and the first reading is taken on the same positioning. So you remember that. Also that is applied on the table. So the last reading and the first reading of the second position of the instrument is written on the same row. Remember that. So this is the first reading of the second position. We have the two intermediates and we have the last readings. After finishing that, we move on to the third position of the instrument. So here we had a second change point. Again, here we have the first reading of the third positioning of the instrument. We have the two intermediates and we have the last reading of that instrument there. So those are the values that we are going to input here. So this is the first reading, second reading, so this is the intermediate reading, both two intermediate, and then we have the last readings of that instrument. Having finished the three columns, move either to the rise or to the fall of the instrument. So we start here. So the first reading, we subtract the second reading, so by the use of a calculator. So the first reading, we subtract that of the second reading here by the use of a calculator. If you get a positive answer, you input on the rise. If you get a negative, you input on the fall. And so let's look at the first calculation. So 2.375 minus 1.73 here you get a positive 0.645. so this is the data that we put. So here we had a rise, and as earlier I had shown you, our staff moved on a higher place. That's why we got a lower value of the staff, because our staff starts from 0 moving upwards. So if the staff was placed at a higher value, the machine did not shift. That means we'll get a lower reading of the staff, because that is shows the position. So here we had a rise, you can see physically. So we had a rise, we moved. So from this position 1 to position 2, we had a rise there, and that is proven using our calculator. So we have a positive value there. We move on to the second reading minus the third reading. So again here we get a positive 1.15115. so again that is a rise. You can see I've illustrated that well. So if you move from the second reading to the third reading, there again we have a rise, because our value was much smaller than that of the previous section. We move again. So after the third reading, we move to the final reading of the first position of the instrument, that is the last reading. So you subtract the third reading minus the fourth reading here by the use of a calculator. So that will be a negative. That falls under the fall column. So that is negative 2.835. so this is the value that we are supposed to write here. So that is the fourth reading there. Again we start on the second positioning of the instrument. So here is the second positioning of our instrument. We start again. So here we had our first reading. So our first reading here, we had the back side. So our first reading again. So this becomes our first reading, our second reading, third reading, and the last our fourth reading. So we are going to tackle only this section here where the instrument was at position 2. So again, so the first reading here, that is the back side, minus the intermediate side, by subtracting it a positive 0.75. so that falls under the rise. Again we move the second reading, we minus the third reading of that position 2. By subtracting that we get a positive 0.235, and then our third reading we subtract by the last reading of the second positioning of the instrument, and again we get a positive 0.85. so there we have a rise. Finishing that, we move again to the third positioning of the instrument. Here we had a change point. That means we again start with our back side. So this is the first reading, second reading, third reading, and here we fourth reading. That is the last reading of the third positioning. So here we have the third positioning of the instrument. And in our third positioning of the instrument, so we start, so the back side minus the intermediate side, there we get a negative. So there we have a fall, so negative 1.195. Again the second reading minus the third reading, so this is the two intermediate, and again we have a negative. That means it falls under the fall, so a negative 0.625. then our third reading minus our fourth reading, that is the last reading, that is the foresight. Again we get a negative 1.375. So that falls under the false. So you remember that. So I've illustrated well there. So there we had a fall. You can see that in the illustrations. After finishing that, we were given in our question, so we were given the reduced level of the benchmark that was taken on the last reading. So here we have a reduced level of 110.2 meters taken on the last reading of that instrument. Having seen that, so here we have our last reading taken on the benchmark. So the benchmark was on the last reading. In all the other questions, so we start with the benchmark being on the first point here, but here we have been given on the last reading. A simple shortcut, we move backwards. So where we had a fall, we add that value. Where we had a rise, we minus. So we move opposite to what we have done here, because we are moving in the opposite direction. So we are starting from below, moving upwards. So you remember that. By this, so let's start. So on the benchmark 110.5, we add 0.375, we get 111.575. Again we add that value to that of the fall, we get 112.2. again we add that value that of the fall, and we get 113.395. Then here on our rise, which was the positive, we subtract all these values and get those of the reduced level. So 113 minus 0.85, we get 112.545. We subtract again 0.25, we get 112.3. Again we subtract 0.765, we get 111.545. Then we start adding, so we add 2.835, we get 114.38. move to the right, so we subtract, and after subtracting 1.115, we get 113.265. then we again subtract this value here, and we get our last reduced level as 112.620. So you remember that we had been given our last reading here as the benchmark. So I have done the opposite of what was supposed to be added. If that value was to start on this first section, we will have moved normally. So here we will have added, and here we'll have subtracted. But because I'm moving on the opposite direction, I've done the opposite of that. Having finished that, we move ahead and we apply the arithmetic check. We had been asked the arithmetic check. So in our arithmetic check, now if we subtract the back side from there, so with the forward side we need to have similar. So this is the summation of the back side and the summation of the forward side subtracted, then should be equal to the summation of the rise subtracted with the fall, and again it should be equal to the last reduced level minus the first reduced level. So you go ahead, so you add the all your back sides, you get the summation of that. You add all of the four side, you get the summation of that. You add all the rise, you get the summation of that. You add all the fall and you get the summation of that. So these are our values. By the use of a calculator, you go ahead and you prove if that was right. So by the use of a calculator, I have proven we have done the right thing. After applying the arithmetic check, it shows that all our calculations were right. So make sure you go ahead and you look at that question, you revise on that, and you see what I have done. So remember to subscribe to the channel. You can go ahead and view. We have more educational videos that are found on the channel. So that's iWords Shorts Empire. Thank you, and that will be all for the lesson.